California, other states, reduce penalties for prostitution to fight sex trafficking. Governor Janet Mills of Maine recently faced a dilemma whether she should sign a bill reducing penalties for those who sell sex. Maine would have been the first state to fully decriminalize prostitution, as discussions intensify across the country about the potential for fighting human trafficking by decriminalizing prostitution and soliciting. In San Diego, anti-trafficking advocates and law enforcement sources are aware of the efforts to legalize prostitution. It's being advocated for sex workers who want the same rights as any other worker in the country. California is also facing another showdown of sorts. Senate Bill 357. Oh my good, Magnum, okay, all right, which would no longer punish those found to have been loitering in a public place with the intent to commit prostitution. Maine, like San Diego, sits at the intersection of human trafficking across state and international borders. That state's bill had elements that anti-trafficking advocates support: reduce penalties for people who have been sold into the sex trade, along with support in the form of social services and opportunities. It would have also increased punishment for pimps and traffickers who coerce often vulnerable people into the underground network. Governor Mills, however, vetoed the legislation after the local organization opposed it, pointing out that pimps could take advantage of the new system. While some hope this bill will protect the survivors of human trafficking, a goal I share, she said, others fear that sex traffickers will use decriminalization of prostitution as a way to entice more people into the trade. I happen to agree. Oregon is now the centerpiece for these controversial efforts. That state is also considering repealing the crimes of prostitution, commercial sexual solicitation, and promoting prostitution. The legislation has been described by KTVZ in Bend, Oregon, as being proposed by an outside group. That group, we found, is Sex Workers Outreach Project, which is very active in the effort behind decriminalization across the country. The argument for the Oregon legislation is that eliminating penalties would help reduce trafficking because pimps couldn't use fear of arrest to keep their victims in line. This would help remove victims from these situations. Phoenix Kalita, the media spokesperson for the Sex Workers Outreach Project, said her organization is focusing its efforts on Oregon for now. Her argument for decriminalization is that it's not effective just to lock people up for prostitution. The effort to decriminalize was given a boost earlier this year when Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance ordered a halt to prosecution of prostitution offenses, and now lawmakers across the country are looking at possible legislation. It's also been pushed as part of an effort to support the rights of sex workers. Another decriminalization advocate active in California and elsewhere in the Washington, D.C. based Collective Action for Safe Spaces, which has advocated for decriminalization of prostitution for a number of years. Their argument is that sex work is not the same as sex trafficking. Okay, if they say so. No matter the claims made regarding legalizing prostitution, when it involves trafficking, it's not a real solution to the problem, said Kathy Hardy. She leads the Survivor Leader Network of San Diego, which has survivors of human trafficking working together to aid the communities of San Diego in responding to modern-day slavery. Hardy is a survivor of the sex industry and a recovering addict that has dedicated the last 20 years of her life helping others trapped in the life on the streets of San Diego. She sees her role to help squash women's addiction to the life as well as their other addictions. She points out that studies done in Europe involving hundreds of women across multiple countries have found that complete decriminalization is not a way to reduce the pressure on women or to fight sex trafficking. Earlier attempts to legalize prostitution in California ended up in federal court, where a judicial panel ruled that in 2018 that laws prohibiting prostitution were in the public interest. But the battle is not over, says supporters of efforts across the country to decriminalize prostitution and soliciting. They believe decriminalization will provide a strong support in the fight against sex trafficking. Hardy says her experiences and what research has shown is the answer is to severely punish buyers and traffickers and provide an exit strategy for prostitutes. To her, the bottom line was and continues to be that the sex industry is not work, it is exploitation. It is the oldest exploitation. They always want to punish the traffickers is one thing, but the buyers. So the buyers and the traffickers are always men. So they really, in my estimation, it's a Me Too for prostitutes, a Me Too for hoes. And they know why they're trying to decriminalize this stuff. It has nothing to do with sex trafficking or getting people out of sex trafficking, because if the girls want out, all they got to do is flag down a police officer. But if you get rid of the buyers, especially get rid of the buyers, I don't know how the buyers get into this. The buyers are nothing but willing customers. So I guess if you drive the demand, because they tried that with crack, that's how come they arrested a lot of crack users. They couldn't stop the flow. They couldn't stop the dealers. They couldn't stop the traffickers. So what they tried to do is drive demand by penalizing drug users, which cost them way more money than expected and darn it killed the whole community, which is why they don't do it with opioids. Well, the other reason is because most opioid users are white. And that's why I think it's going to get decriminalized this time, because the vast majority of women actually going to be applying the sex trade is actually going to be white. And they do not want to go out and lock it up all those good white women trying to survive and eat. So coffee time is coming. In fact, they might open up franchises for coffee. And but a lot of these, the reason is that a lot of the selling of sex is selling of coffee, for lack of a better term. It's actually going to go to online sites like Listserv, and then the rogue, or the the renegade street girls. The guys out there going to be selling it for nothing. Have their little backpacks and their hoodies and basically stop by and not even solicit two guys like you saw in New York. Solicit two guys and give her 2 for 1 special. Get her $20 and then roll out, or her $10 and roll out, depending on what the price of a coffee is at that day and in that location, and what sugar and cream it has in it. But that's the initiative, and I want to see if the bill 357 actually gets enacted into law, because once they decriminalize it, man, just like going after weed, people with weed, said unless you're doing something crazy, cops ain't going to be trying to bust people having sex. I mean, if you can find, if somebody turns into a pimp, then nobody's going to weep for that pimp, because the game is the game. But just like in New York, man, pimps are parked on the street, the buyers are causing traffic jams, and the cops are just sitting there. They're not about to enter into this mess. If they can't police, and they can't police properly, cops are just going to look the other way. They have better things to do. Cops are really do not like busting prostitutes and that kind of stuff anyway. All they're going to do is sit there to make sure that nobody gets hurt. That's the reason that, in New York, they have a cop sitting down at the end of the block. He just wants to make sure that nobody gets killed and nobody gets hurt, and everybody does their business and basically goes on about their business. And that's probably what's going to happen, because they don't want to waste their time, man, busting prostitutes and hookers and having these special divisions, trying to lock up Johns that are going to be out the next day. A regular businessman trying to get his jollies off, and you're going to lock him up and he can't go home and support his kids. It's not going to happen. And since these women need to go home and feed their children, they drop the business. They can't make no money. They can't make no money, then they can't feed themselves or their children. They can't find a place to stay off the street. And if you dump these chicks on the street and they start going really renegade and the price really drops, and then you're going to have a real problem, because they won't be able to even afford a place to stay, a place to eat, and they'll be basically having sex for food. And that's really not what you want. I don't want it. But sometimes if it comes, it comes. And all I'm doing is being the bearer of bad news, or good news, depending on who you are. And if they don't kind of do this right, and you get a lot of these chicks going from regular or 87s or even 85s to diesel, you're going to make these girls predatory. And you don't want a whole bunch of predatory chicks in this system, because if they become predatory, women tend to gravitate to the middle, right? So if you have a lot of predatory chicks talking predatory language, you have a whole bunch of other chicks on the other side. They're going to be trying to do the same thing, even though they won't be diesels, but they're going to be trying to take advantage of their boyfriends and their husbands and their significant others the same way. And the whole system is actually going to go kaput. So they better be careful how they do this. There's a reason that it wasn't women, that made prostitution. It wasn't men that made prostitution illegal in the first place. It's actually women. There's three things during the 1920s, right? When women got the vote, the first thing they do is when they got the vote, they prohibited alcohol and prostitution, something that their husbands were doing, because they wanted to control their husbands and make sure they're home and make sure their husbands weren't giving money away to the hookers and the bartenders. There's a reason that that women actually want prostitution laws, because if you do not, you actually put too much supply into the system. Put too much supply in the system, and it gets to the point where a homeless man can have more sex than a married man that's working 12 hours a day. Bruh, it's going to change the game overnight. I've seen this change the game. I've seen this change the game. When crack came in and the women started, basically devaluing their vajayjay, we're still feeling the effects. Hot Girl Summer and Megan Thee Stallion, all those kind of folks, that was an outgrowth of the crack era, and women basically making commodities out of their punani. And this, if they don't do it right, it's going to be 10 times worse. You think the crack era in the 1980s was bad as far as what it did to the community? You ain't seen nothing yet if they don't do this right. Brothers might enjoy the process because the price of gasoline, the price of oil, the price of punani will be so cheap. But what it will do to your society and do to your communities won't be pretty. You're already seeing it in New York, where you actually see this stuff going on in broad daylight on the sidewalks. What if your children have to walk by that every day and see that out in broad daylight? How is it going to affect their psyche? How is it going to affect your little girl's psyche to see just women just on top of a mailbox or on top of a newspaper stand with two guys? God, we have to think. Even though we want these women to get their comeuppance, okay, there's ways to do it and there's ways not to do it. And I'm not saying that if it happens, don't take advantage of it. Hey, if it's out there and you can't stop it because you have no power to stop it, hey, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. Can't tell you not to, because when I was young, guess what? That's a tale for another day. Anyway, with that, this is BGS out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.